Welcome, high schoolers, to this explainer. Okay, right off the bat, I want you to take a second and just think about your own lives right now. Really think about it. How has your relationship with your grandparents shifted as you've grown up, started high school, and really actively sought out your own independence? I mean, maybe when you were little, you used to hold their hand everywhere you went, you hung on their every word, and now? Well, now maybe you barely have time to text them back between your AP classes, your extracurriculars, hanging out with friends, the whole shebang. It happens to the best of us, right? Today, we're going to explore that exact, deeply human, sometimes painful transition, but we're going to do it through the lens of a true literary masterpiece. We are looking at Khushwant Singh's absolutely brilliant story, The Portrait of a Lady. Throughout this explainer, we're going to totally break down the characterization, we'll look at the shifting family bonds, and we'll unpack the overarching themes in this nostalgic classic. So, get comfortable because this is a story that's going to resonate with literally every single one of you. Okay, let's just quickly breeze through our roadmap for today. We're going to start off with author and nostalgia, then we'll move right into visualizing the grandparents. From there, we'll trace their evolving relationship through phase 1, the village bond, phase 2, the city disconnect, and finally, the departure and return. Keep this structure in the back of your mind because it's a perfect framework for your exams.
Section 1. Author and Nostalgia.
All right, let's talk about the man behind this story. Khushwant Singh. He lived from 1915 all the way to 2014. Think about that for a second. That is nearly 100 years of witnessing massive, world-altering history. He was one of India's most prominent writers, journalists, and historians. And the absolute most crucial thing you need to know for your studies, the thing you definitely want to put in your notes, is that The Portrait of a Lady is a deeply autobiographical account. This is his own lived experience, his own relationship with his grandmother. But, and I want to make something very, very clear here, this story isn't just some sweet, simple memory about an old woman. Not at all. It represents a much broader, much heavier theme. Singh is using his personal, micro-level story to capture the massive emotional nuances of a traditional Indian household that is transitioning through periods of rapid modernization and urban displacement. Actually, it's kind of like a giant puzzle. As we go through this explainer, watch how the grandmother becomes this powerful, unmoving symbol for tradition, while the author, the young boy, becomes a symbol for the relentless, unavoidable march of modern times. It's the old world meeting the new world, played out right inside a family home. Moving on to Section 2, Visualizing the Grandparents, a study in contrasts. Now, take a look at the sharp visual contrast on this slide. Singh paints these literal portraits with such incredible precision, it's like we're looking at a photograph. Let's look at the grandmother first. He describes her as short, fat, and slightly bent. Her face is just this crisscross of wrinkles. She hobbles around the house, always dressed in spotless white clothes. She's got one hand resting on her waist to sort of balance her stoop, and the other hand is constantly, and I mean constantly, telling the beads of her rosary. She is active, she is present, and she projects this aura of absolute purity. And then we have the grandfather. Now, the grandfather's portrait hangs above the mantelpiece. He wears a big turban and loose-fitting clothes. He has this massive, long, white beard that covers the best part of his chest. But here is the truly brilliant, laugh-out-loud part of Singh's description. He notes that his grandfather looked at least 100 years old. He says he didn't look like someone who would have a wife, but rather like someone who could only have lots and lots of grandchildren. It's such a humorous, slightly exaggerated image, right? It perfectly captures that specific childhood feeling, where your older relatives just seem so incredibly ancient. To a kid, they don't seem like regular people who had youth or romance. They're just these mythical, ancient beings who exist solely to be grandparents. Which brings us to this quote, like a winter landscape in the mountains. Wow, this brilliantly illustrates the grandmother's entire aura. If you get an essay question about literary devices on your exam, you absolutely, unequivocally must use this quote. Emphasize this beautiful simile. I want you to close your eyes for a second and think, what does a winter landscape in the mountains actually feel like? It feels huge, right? Expansive. You can almost feel breathing in that cool, crisp air. It's completely still, it's white, it's serene, and above all else, it is unshakable. A mountain doesn't move when the wind blows. And this is exactly what the grandmother represents in this story. She isn't just an old lady wandering around the house. She is a pure, peaceful, and totally constant presence in a world that is about to change very rapidly around her. She is the anchor.
Section 3, Phase 1, Village Bond, an Unbreakable Partnership.
So let's walk through this heavily integrated daily routine to really show how deeply involved the grandmother was in his early life. Imagine the absolute warmth and safety of this first phase in the village. Every single morning, without fail, she would be the one to wake him up. She would get him dressed, bathed, and fully ready for school. She would carefully wash and plaster his wooden slate with yellow chalk, tying it into a bundle with an earthen ink pot and a reed pen, meticulously preparing his tools for learning. And then they would make the journey to the village school together. Think about that level of involvement. She wasn't just a guardian sitting on the sidelines. She was his caretaker, his morning alarm clock, his personal assistant, and his commuting buddy all rolled into one. Their lives were completely intertwined in this simple, predictable, rhythmic routine. For the young boy, his grandmother was basically his entire world.
And this beautiful dynamic, it didn't just stop at the school gates. It continued right into the school itself. In their village, the school was attached directly to the temple. So while the priest taught the young children the alphabet and the morning prayer out on the veranda, what was the grandmother doing? She didn't just go home. She sat right inside the temple, completely absorbed in reading the Holy Scriptures. Think about what this represents for a second. For them, education and spirituality weren't two totally separate spheres of life. They went hand in hand. It created this incredible atmosphere of a shared purpose. They were both learning, they were both growing, just in their own different ways, sitting side by side. It's a real partnership.
And of course, their journey back home was marked by another absolutely vital ritual. They would always bring along stale chapatis, feeding them to the village street dogs that would follow them, growling and fighting each other for the bread. I really want you to remember this specific detail, because it highlights her deep, active compassion for all living creatures. In the village, she has the space, she has the freedom to interact intimately with nature and her local community. Her spirituality, you see, isn't just locked away inside the temple. It's practically applied in how she treats the street dogs outside. It's a lived faith.
Which brings us to Section 4, Phase 2, City Disconnect, the turning point. All right, take a deep breath, because this is where the tone of the story really shifts. The crucial point here is how the sheer force of modernization physically separates them. The parents call them to the city, and everything changes. Yes, they still shared a bedroom in the city house, but the actual mechanics of their day-to-day life completely fractured. The author started going to an English medium school, and how did he get there? In a motor bus. The grandmother could no longer walk him to school. She couldn't sit in a conveniently attached temple. The motor bus is a huge, powerful symbol here. It's a piece of modern, noisy machinery that literally acts as a wedge, driving a barrier between the young boy and his traditional grandmother. As the years rolled by in this bustling city, they saw less and less of each other. This initiates a very sad but very real phase of quiet distance. But listen, the separation wasn't just physical. That would be too simple. The separation was deeply ideological. Let's look at her specific grievances with his modern education, because her traditional worldview severely, violently almost, clashes with his new curriculum. First off, she was deeply distressed, like genuinely upset, that the city school offered absolutely no teachings on God or the ancient Holy Scriptures. To her, an education without spirituality wasn't an education at all. Second, she had a complete and total distrust of modern science. When he came home eagerly talking about English words, the law of gravity, or Archimedes' principle, she couldn't help him with his homework anymore. She didn't believe in these things, and she felt totally alienated. And finally, the nail in the coffin: her absolute dislike of his music lessons. In her traditional view, music had, quote, lewd associations. She believed it was the monopoly of beggars and harlots, completely unfit for gentlefolk like her grandson. Now, notice how we are impartially looking at her worldview here. We aren't taking sides. She isn't meant to be seen as just backwards or stubborn. Rather, she is someone whose entire foundation of knowledge, her entire way of being, has been abruptly rendered obsolete in this new city environment. It's actually quite heartbreaking.
So, what does a person do when they feel completely disconnected from the world around them? When the person they love the most is growing away from them? Well, this slide brilliantly illustrates her coping mechanism. As she loses that day-to-day connection with her grandson and his fast-paced, modernizing world, she turns inward. She adopts a strict, almost monastic seclusion routine. From sunrise to sunset, she sits by her spinning wheel, rarely speaking a word to anyone. Her lips move continuously in silent, inaudible prayers. Her fingers are always busy, telling the beads of her rosary. She doesn't fight the modernization. She accepts her seclusion with a quiet, dignified resignation. She retreats into the only things she can still control: her faith and her silence.
But wait, there was one beautiful exception to her daily seclusion. The absolute happiest half hour of her entire day: feeding the sparrows. Every afternoon, she would sit out in the veranda, breaking bread into tiny little bits. Hundreds of little sparrows would collect around her, creating what Singh calls a veritable bedlam of chirpings. It was pure noisy chaos. Some sat on her legs, some perched on her shoulders, some even brazenly landed right on her head. And you know what? She never shooed them away. She just smiled. This is so important for your character analysis because it shows how our compassion adapted. In the village, it was the street dogs. In the cold, concrete isolation of the city, it became the birds. This simple, daily act of love became the emotional anchor of her lonely city life. Section 5. Departure and the Return. The Final Gestures.
Let's track this final timeline. As if the city wasn't enough of a wedge, the author eventually decides he must go abroad for higher studies. This is a journey that will take exactly 5 years. Now put yourself in his shoes for a second. 5 years. That's longer than your entire high school experience. He is terrified. Why? Because his grandmother is incredibly old. He genuinely, deep down, fears that she will not survive his absence. A 5-year gap at her advanced age seems like an impossible hurdle to overcome. He packs his bags and prepares himself for the harsh reality that saying goodbye at the railway station might literally be the very last time he ever sees her alive.
The departure scene at the station is a total masterclass in emotional restraint. She comes to the station to see him off, of course, but she doesn't talk, she doesn't cry, she doesn't show any outward emotional breakdown or cling to him, begging him to stay. Instead, her mind is completely lost in prayer, her fingers still frantically busy with her rosary, and then right before he leaves, she silently kisses his forehead. The author describes this touching moment as the moist imprint. He cherishes this physical gesture. He holds on to it tightly in his memory, thinking it is the absolute last sign of physical contact between them. It is a wildly powerful moment that shows her immense internal affection. She loves him deeply, but she completely masks it by her outward silence and her stoic, unbreakable emotional control. She doesn't want to burden his departure with her tears. But, fast forward, 5 years later, the author returns. And against all of his worst fears, who is standing right there at the station to meet him? The grandmother. And remarkably, almost magically, she looks absolutely no older than the day he left 5 years ago. But what happens that evening back at the house is a total, triumphant shock to everyone. For the very first time in his entire life, she breaks her quiet, prayerful routine. She doesn't pray. Instead, she goes out and gathers the local neighborhood women. She gets her hands on an old, dilapidated, sagging drum, and she beats it for hours, and she sings. She sings loudly about the return of warriors. Think about this shift. This is a fiercely upbeat, unapologetically celebratory explosion of emotion from a woman who has spent years and years in quiet resignation. He didn't just come back from school. To her, her warrior has returned victorious. It's a spectacular, exhausting release of all the love, all the worry, and all the relief that she had so carefully held back at the train station 5 years ago. So as we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with a challenge for your own studies and essay prep. Think about this contrast. What does her silent, stoic kiss at the station, juxtaposed with her final, frantic, drum-beating celebration, truly represent about her core character? How does a woman, who was described earlier as a peaceful, unshakable winter landscape, possess the sudden fire and passion to sing of returning warriors for hours on end? I want you to heavily analyze these final acts of emotional control and triumphant celebration for your own essays. Think critically about what Khushwant Singh is trying to tell us about the hidden depths, the quiet resilience, and the profound enduring love of the generation that came before us. They might seem quiet, they might seem traditional, but there is a fire in them. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, you guys. Keep these themes in mind, trust your analysis, and good luck unpacking this beautiful, timeless story in your classes.